The morning rush at the diner was always the same. Coffee brewing, bacon sizzling on the griddle, and the constant chatter of people starting their day. She moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing plates and refilling cups without being asked. After 3 years of doing this, her body knew the rhythm by heart. Her name was written on a small tag pinned to her uniform, but most customers never bothered to read it. To them, she was just the woman who brought their food and made sure their coffee never ran empty. That was fine by her, most days. It was easier to blend into the background, to be invisible, to not draw attention to the dreams she'd buried deep inside. The diner sat on a busy corner in Nashville, the kind of place where the vinyl booths were cracked and patched with duct tape, and the menu hadn't changed in 20 years. But the food was good, the coffee was strong, and the rent was cheap. That's all that mattered when you were trying to survive in a city full of people chasing the same impossible dream. She'd come here 5 years ago with a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of hope. Nashville was where dreams came true, or so everyone said. The city of music, where talent scouts lurked around every corner and anyone with a voice could make it big. But reality had a way of crushing those fairy tales pretty quickly. The auditions had been brutal. Hundreds of people showed up for every open call, all of them talented, all of them desperate. She'd made it through a few rounds here and there, got some compliments, even a callback once, but there was always someone younger, someone with more connections, someone whose parents knew someone who knew someone. After 2 years of rejection, her savings had run dry, and the bills kept coming. That's when she'd taken the job at the diner. Just temporarily, she'd told herself. Just until she could save up enough to record a proper demo. Just until the right opportunity came along. But temporary had turned into 3 years, and the keyboard she'd brought from home now sat in the corner of her tiny apartment, covered with a sheet and gathering dust. Every morning when she tied on her apron, she felt a little piece of that old dream slip away. But bills didn't pay themselves, and pride didn't keep the lights on. So she smiled at customers, memorized their orders, and pretended that this was enough. The man walked in on a Tuesday morning when the rain was coming down in sheets. He shook off his umbrella at the door and took a seat at the counter, right in front of where she was sorting silverware. He was maybe in his mid-30s, wearing an expensive jacket that seemed out of place in their humble diner, and he had the kind of distracted air that said his mind was somewhere far more important than here. She grabbed a menu and placed it in front of him with her usual greeting. He barely glanced up, mumbling something about black coffee. No, please. No smile. Just a man who saw her as a function rather than a person. She'd served 1,000 customers like him before. As she poured his coffee, she tried the usual small talk. Something about the weather, how crazy the rain was coming down. He responded with a grunt, his eyes glued to his phone screen. His fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, and whatever he was doing clearly mattered more than basic courtesy. She walked away without another word. Some people were like that, too caught up in their own world to notice anyone else. In a strange way, she understood it. Hadn't she been like that once, back when her music was everything, when she'd practice for hours and forget to eat? When every song felt like the most important thing in the universe? The man became a regular fixture over the next few days. Always the same seat at the counter. Always the same black coffee. Always the same dismissive attitude. She learned his pattern quickly. He'd arrive around 9 in the morning, set up his laptop, and work for hours, occasionally ordering toast or a sandwich without looking up from his screen. Other servers started to complain about him. He was a lousy tipper, they said. Never said thank you. Never made eye contact. Just another rude customer who thought the world revolved around him. But she didn't mind much. At least he was predictable. And predictable made her job easier. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was why he was really there. The laptop that commanded all his attention wasn't filled with boring spreadsheets or business emails. He was a talent scout for one of the bigger record labels in town, and he was searching desperately for something he couldn't quite name. A spark. An authenticity. A voice that didn't sound like everything else flooding the market. He'd spent the last month going to showcase after showcase, sitting through hundreds of performances. Everyone sounded polished, trained, professional, but they all sounded the same, like they'd been manufactured in the same factory with the same parts. He was looking for something raw, something real, something that made you stop and actually feel something. The irony was almost painful. Here he sat, day after day, being served by someone who possessed exactly what he was searching for. But he never looked up long enough to see her as anything more than a waitress. She was part of the scenery, like the worn countertop or the flickering neon sign in the window. She'd catch him sometimes, staring at his screen with frustration written all over his face. Once, she heard him on a phone call, telling someone that he was running out of options, that maybe they were looking in the wrong places. She'd refilled his coffee and moved on, not knowing that his words were about to become prophetically true. The diner owner, a man who'd run the place for 30 years, had recently made an impulse purchase at an estate sale. An old upright piano, the kind you'd find in a grandmother's living room, with ivory keys that had yellowed with age. He thought it would add character to the place, make it feel more homey. He'd had it delivered and pushed into the corner near the window, where it sat mostly forgotten. Customers occasionally walked over to look at it, running their fingers across the keys and plinking out childhood songs they barely remembered. It was out of tune, and no one who worked there knew how to play it properly. It became just another piece of furniture, a conversation starter that usually led nowhere. She walked past that piano dozens of times a day, carefully avoiding looking at it too closely. Pianos reminded her of before, of the hours she'd spent practicing, of the music that used to flow through her, like breathing. Looking at it hurt in a way she couldn't quite explain, like seeing a photograph of someone you used to love. The regular with the laptop never even glanced at the piano. It wasn't what he was looking for. He was searching for his next big star in recording studios and performance venues, not in the corner of a rundown diner. Sometimes the thing you're desperately seeking is sitting right in front of you. Invisible. Because you're looking in all the wrong places. Neither of them knew it yet, but everything was about to change. One simple moment, one unexpected decision, would shatter all their assumptions about who mattered and who didn't, about where talent could be found, and who deserved to be heard. Sometimes destiny doesn't announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it just sits quietly in the corner, waiting for someone to finally pay attention. The piano sat in the corner for 2 weeks before anyone really tried to play it. Sure, people would tap a few keys here and there, usually after a couple of beers with dinner, but nothing serious. It was just there, taking up space, collecting coffee rings on its top from customers who used it as a table. She noticed that the owner had finally called someone to tune it. A technician came in one afternoon, spent about an hour working on it, and left shaking his head. The piano was old, he'd said, but it had good bones. It would never sound perfect, but it would do the job well enough. The owner seemed satisfied with that assessment. Thursday nights were always the slowest shift of the week. The dinner rush was never really a rush, and by 8 o'clock, the diner usually emptied out, except for a handful of stragglers. She actually liked these quiet evenings. Less chaos, less rushing around, more time to think. Though sometimes thinking was the last thing she wanted to do. That particular Thursday, only 3 customers remained as the clock pushed past 8:30. The regular with the laptop was there, of course, typing away like his life depended on it. A father sat in a booth with his young daughter, maybe 6 or 7 years old, finishing up their dinner. The little girl had been eyeing the piano all evening, whispering to her father and pointing at it. She was wiping down tables when she heard the girl's voice rise with excitement. The child was practically bouncing in her seat, tugging on her father's sleeve, and begging him to play the piano. The father looked tired, the kind of exhausted that comes from working long hours and raising a kid on your own. But love won out over fatigue. the way it usually does. He slid out of the booth and walked over to the piano with his daughter practically dragging him along. The man sat down on the bench, cracked his knuckles in an exaggerated way that made his daughter giggle, and started to play. It was a simple children's song, something about twinkling stars, and his playing was clumsy at best. He hit wrong notes, lost the rhythm, and had to start over twice. But his daughter didn't care. She clapped and danced beside the piano like she was watching the greatest concert of her life. Pure joy radiated from that little girl, and for a moment, everyone in the diner was smiling. Even the owner who'd come out from the kitchen to watch. When the father finished, the girl threw her arms around his neck. Then she turned to the mostly empty diner and announced in that fearless way only children can manage that someone should play a real song. The father laughed, embarrassed, and tried to shush her, but she was insistent. She wanted to hear what the piano could really do. The diner fell quiet. The owner chuckled and said he sure couldn't play. The father shrugged, apologetically. The regular at the counter didn't even look up from his laptop. No one volunteered. She'd been standing near the kitchen door, watching the whole scene unfold. Something about that little girl's disappointment hit her harder than it should have. Maybe it was the long shift. Maybe it was the fact that tomorrow marked exactly 3 years since she'd taken this job temporarily. Maybe it was just that she was tired of being invisible, of keeping everything locked up inside. Before she could talk herself out of it, she found herself walking toward the piano. Her heart was hammering in her chest, and her hands felt clammy. The father and daughter stepped aside, looking at her with curiosity. She sat down on the bench, and the wood felt both foreign and familiar under her. The keys were cool beneath her fingertips. How long had it been? Months since she'd touched a piano. She used to play every single day, for hours on end. It had been as natural as breathing. Now her fingers felt stiff and uncertain. She took a deep breath and let her hands find their position. Muscle memory is a strange thing. Your mind might forget, but your body remembers. Her fingers knew where to go. Even after all this time, she started to play a melody she'd written 2 years ago, during the darkest period after she'd given up on her dreams. The song was about invisible people, the ones who serve your coffee, who clean your offices at night, who deliver your packages. The people you look past every single day, without really seeing. It was about feeling small in a big city, about dreams that die quietly without anyone noticing, about the strength it takes to wake up and keep going when you feel like you don't matter. She'd never played it for anyone before. It had been too personal, too raw. But tonight, in this nearly empty diner, with a little girl who just wanted to hear something beautiful, she let it out. Then she started to sing. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. All those years of training hadn't disappeared. They'd just been waiting. The notes poured out of her, rich and full of emotion. Every word carried the weight of 3 years of holding back, of staying silent, of pretending to be less than she was. The song built and soared, filling every corner of the diner. Her voice had range and power, moving from soft, aching verses to a chorus that demanded to be heard. This wasn't some amateur dabbling at music. This was years of classical training, natural talent, and genuine soul all coming together. She got lost in the music, forgot where she was for those few minutes. The diner disappeared. The exhaustion disappeared. All that existed was the song. The way it had always been, when music was her whole world. At the counter, fingers stopped moving across a laptop keyboard. The regular looked up slowly, his expression shifting from irritation at the interruption to something else entirely. Confusion. Maybe. Disbelief. He set his phone down, an action he hadn't performed once in 2 weeks of sitting in that spot. The owner stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, the spatula in his hand forgotten. The father wrapped his arm around his daughter, both of them completely still, mesmerized. When the final note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, loaded with meaning. She kept her hands on the keys, afraid to look up, afraid to see their reactions. What had she just done? This wasn't professional. She was supposed to be working. The owner might be angry that she'd stopped doing her job to play piano. Then, the applause started. It wasn't polite golf clapping. It was genuine, enthusiastic. The little girl was jumping up and down, squealing with delight. Her father was clapping hard, a huge smile on his face. The owner was actually wiping his eyes, trying to pretend he had something in them. And the regular at the counter, the man who hadn't looked at her as a human being once in 2 weeks, was staring at her like he was seeing a ghost. His laptop sat forgotten, his coffee going cold. He was leaning forward, completely focused on her for the first time. She stood up quickly, her face burning red. The reality of what she'd just done crashed over her like a wave. She'd made a scene, drawn attention to herself. Broken character. The safety of invisibility was shattered. She mumbled something about being sorry for the interruption and practically ran back behind the counter. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed a dish towel and pretended to be busy organizing things that didn't need organizing. The coffee stirrers didn't need to be arranged by size. The sugar packets were fine the way they were, but she couldn't stop the trembling in her hands, couldn't slow her racing heart. Something had shifted in the air, and she could feel it. The regular was still staring at her. And for the first time, since he'd walked into the diner, he looked like he wanted to say something. Everything was about to change, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. She kept her eyes down, focusing on wiping the same spot on the counter for the 3rd time. Her heart was still pounding, and she could feel everyone's eyes on her. The little girl was still chattering excitedly to her father about the pretty song, but she couldn't bring herself to look in their direction. The minutes crawled by. She moved mechanically, refilling salt shakers that were already full, straightening menus that were already straight. Anything to avoid acknowledging what had just happened. The father and daughter eventually paid their bill, and as they left, the little girl waved at her with both hands, calling out a cheerful thank you. She managed a weak smile in return. Now it was just her, the owner in the back, and him, the regular. She could feel his presence at the counter, like a weight. Could sense that he was still watching her. Part of her hoped he'd just go back to his laptop, pretend nothing had happened, let things return to normal. But she knew better. Something had changed in the air between them. She heard him clear his throat. Then his voice, speaking to her directly for the first time in 2 weeks, asking if they could talk. Her stomach tightened into a knot. She grabbed the coffee pot as a shield and walked over, still not quite meeting his eyes. He introduced himself properly, like they'd never met before. In a way, they hadn't. He told her his name, then slid a business card across the counter. She glanced at it, without picking it up. The logo of a record label was embossed at the top, one of the bigger ones in Nashville. Underneath his name were the words, Talent Scout and Artist Development. Her first reaction was anger, hot and sudden. Of course he was a talent scout. Of course he'd been sitting here for 2 weeks, searching for his next discovery, and hadn't seen her until she'd literally performed for him. She'd been invisible right up until the moment she'd made herself useful to him. He was talking, words spilling out quickly. Something about her voice being incredible, her technique being flawless. Asking if she'd ever recorded anything, if she performed anywhere, if she had representation. Each question felt like a small knife, reminding her of all the things she didn't have, all the opportunities that had passed her by. She cut him off, her voice harder than she intended. Told him she was just a waitress, that this was what she did. Those words tasted like ashes in her mouth, but she forced them out anyway. Just a waitress, as if that was all she'd ever been, all she'd ever be. He looked confused, started to protest, but she was already walking away, disappearing into the kitchen under the pretense of checking on something. She leaned against the cool metal of the walk-in refrigerator, trying to steady her breathing. The business card was still sitting on the counter where he'd left it. The owner found her there a few minutes later. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her in that comfortable silence of people who'd worked together long enough to communicate without words. Then he spoke quietly, telling her he'd had no idea she could sing like that, asking why she'd never mentioned it. She shrugged, not trusting herself to speak. He continued, gentle but firm, told her that whatever had happened out there, whatever that man had offered, she should at least think about it. Life didn't hand out second chances very often, he said. Sometimes you had to grab them even when you were scared. When she came back out, the regular was still there, waiting. He'd ordered another coffee but hadn't touched it. The business card remained on the counter between them, like a challenge. He tried again, softer this time. Asked if he could just explain. No pressure, just 5 minutes of her time. Something in his tone made her pause. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the way the owner's words were still echoing in her head. Maybe it was just that she was tired of running from everything. She nodded once, quick, and he started to talk. He told her he'd been searching for months, going to showcases, sitting through auditions, listening to demo after demo. Everyone was good, he said. Everyone was polished and trained and professional. But they all sounded the same, like they'd been built from the same blueprint. He was looking for something different, something real. What she'd done tonight, he said, that was real, raw and honest and absolutely stunning. The kind of voice that made people stop what they were doing and actually listen. He'd almost missed it entirely, he admitted, and the irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been sitting here for weeks looking for exactly what she had, and he'd been too blind to see it. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But she'd heard promises before. When she'd first come to Nashville, she'd been told she had potential, that she just needed to wait for the right opportunity, that her time would come. She'd waited. The opportunity never came. Her time ran out along with her savings. She told him this, the words coming out flat and tired. Told him about the auditions, the rejections, the callbacks that led nowhere. Told him how she'd spent 2 years chasing a dream that didn't want to be caught, and how she'd finally accepted that some people were meant to make it and some people weren't. He listened without interrupting. And when she finished, he didn't try to dismiss her experiences or tell her she was wrong. Instead, he did something unexpected. He apologized, said he was sorry that the industry had treated her that way, that good people with real talent got overlooked all the time because of stupid reasons that had nothing to do with their ability. Then he made her an offer, but not the one she expected. He didn't promise her a record deal, or fame, or any of the things that previous people had dangled like carrots. Instead, he asked if she'd be willing to just come by the studio sometime. No audition, no pressure, just to see the space. Maybe talk about her music if she wanted to. She almost said no. The word was right there on her tongue, ready to protect her from more disappointment. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the sincerity in his voice. Maybe it was the fact that he wasn't promising her the moon and stars. Maybe it was just that tiny, stubborn part of her that had never completely given up, even when she thought it had. She picked up the business card, finally. Held it between her fingers, feeling the weight of it. It was just paper, she told herself. Just cardboard with ink on it. It didn't mean anything unless she let it mean something. He came back the next day. And the day after that. But something was different now. He said good morning when he arrived. Said please and thank you. Asked her name and actually used it. Started having real conversations instead of grunting into his phone. He didn't push her about the studio visit. Didn't bring it up every day or pressure her for an answer. Instead, he just talked to her like a human being. Asked about her day. Told her about his. Shared stories about the music industry, both the good and the ugly. He was honest about how hard it was, how unfair it could be, how talent alone wasn't always enough. But he also told her about the artists he'd worked with, who'd made it despite the odds. People who'd been overlooked for years before someone finally listened. People who'd worked other jobs to survive while nurturing their passion on the side. People who were ready to give up right before everything changed. She found herself looking forward to his morning visits. Found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. Told him about the scholarship to music school she'd turned down because her family needed her at home. About the years of classical training her grandmother had paid for, practicing in a tiny apartment while neighbors banged on the walls. About the notebooks full of songs she'd written but never recorded. Melodies that lived only in her head. 3 weeks after that Thursday night at the piano, she finally said yes. She'd come see the studio. No promises. No commitments. Just a visit. The business card had been sitting on her dresser at home all that time, propped against the mirror where she'd see it every morning. A reminder that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. That sometimes the thing you'd given up on could circle back around when you least expected it. She just had to be brave enough to reach for it one more time. The recording studio was tucked away on a side street she'd walked past 100 times without noticing. Funny how that worked. Places could be invisible too, hiding in plain sight just like people. She stood outside for a full 5 minutes before walking in. Her hand on the door handle. Frozen, with indecision. This was stupid, she told herself. She was 28 years old, working a dead-end job, and here she was getting her hopes up again like some naive kid fresh off the bus. She should turn around, go back to her apartment, forget this whole thing. The diner needed her for the evening shift anyway, but her hand pushed the door open before her brain could win the argument. Inside, the studio was nothing like she'd imagined. She'd pictured something cold and corporate, all glass and steel and intimidating equipment. Instead, it felt warm, almost cozy. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, walls covered with album covers, and photographs of artists she recognized. Some she'd listened to growing up, never knowing they'd recorded in this very building. He was waiting for her in the lobby, and his face lit up when he saw her. Not the fake enthusiasm of someone trying to make a sale, but genuine relief, like he'd been half convinced she wouldn't show up. She'd been half convinced of that herself. He gave her a tour, explaining everything in simple terms without talking down to her. Showed her the different studios, the control rooms, the lounge where artists could relax between sessions. Introduced her to a few people who were working that day. Engineers and producers who greeted her warmly and went back to their work without making a big deal of her presence. Then he brought her to Studio B, a smaller room with incredible acoustics. A piano sat in the corner. A beautiful grand that looked like it cost more than she'd make in 5 years at the diner. He told her it was a Steinway, one of the best pianos in Nashville. Then he asked if she wanted to play. Her throat went dry. This wasn't what she'd expected. She thought maybe they'd talk, discuss possibilities, maybe listen to some demos of other artists. She hadn't prepared herself for this, for the possibility of actually performing again in a professional space. She shook her head, backing away slightly. Too much. Too fast. She wasn't ready. He didn't push. Just nodded, understanding, and suggested they grab coffee instead. There was a cafe down the street. Nothing fancy. They sat by the window, and he asked her about her songs, how many she'd written, what they were about, if she'd ever tried to record them on her own. She told him about the notebooks. 5 of them, filled cover to cover with lyrics and melodies. Songs about her hometown, about leaving, about loss and hope, and all the messy stuff in between. She'd tried recording some on her phone once, but it sounded terrible, so she'd given up. He asked if he could hear them sometime. Not in the studio, not as an audition. Just as a person who was curious about her work. Maybe she could play something at the diner during a slow shift, casual and low pressure. The idea terrified and excited her in equal measure. But she found herself saying, maybe. Not yes, but not no either. Progress, she supposed. Over the next 2 weeks, something shifted inside her. She started looking at the piano in the diner differently, stopped avoiding it, started running her fingers over the keys when no one was watching. The muscle memory was still there, stronger than she'd realized. Her hands remembered songs she thought she'd forgotten. One quiet afternoon, she pulled out one of the notebooks from her bag. Just to look at it, she told herself. Just to remember what she'd written all those years ago. But once she started reading, she couldn't stop. Some of the songs made her cringe. The lyrics too obvious. The melodies too simple. But others surprised her. They were better than she remembered. Raw, yes. Unpolished, definitely. But honest in a way that a lot of modern music wasn't. He kept coming to the diner, but their relationship had changed. They were friends now, or at least something close to it. He told her about the pressure from his label to find new talent, about the artists he'd discovered who'd gone on to do amazing things, and the ones who'd crashed and burned despite having everything going for them. She told him things she hadn't told anyone in years. About her grandmother, who'd sacrificed so much to pay for her lessons, who'd died believing her granddaughter would make it big someday. About the guilt she carried for letting that dream die, for wasting all those years of training and support. He listened without judgment, without trying to fix everything. Sometimes, that was all a person needed. Someone to just listen. One evening, after the dinner rush had cleared and the diner was nearly empty, she made a decision. The notebook was in her bag. The piano was in the corner. He was sitting at his usual spot at the counter. Before she could overthink it, she walked over to the piano and sat down. Her hands were shaking, but she placed them on the keys anyway. Started to play one of her songs. One she'd written 3 years ago, about feeling invisible. The lyrics came back to her like greeting an old friend. Her voice was quiet at first. Uncertain, but it grew stronger with each verse. He didn't move from his seat, didn't pull out his phone to record, didn't do anything except listen. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he told her something that changed everything. He said the song was good. Really good. But more than that, it was authentic. It came from a real place. Told a real story. That's what people were hungry for, he said. Not perfection. He asked if she'd be willing to record a demo. Nothing official. Nothing binding. Just get a few of her songs recorded properly so she could hear what they sounded like with real production. The studio would cover the cost. If nothing came of it, fine. But at least she'd have something tangible. Something that proved her music was real, and not just a dream she'd imagined. She wanted to say yes immediately. But fear held her back. What if she failed again? What if the recording proved that she wasn't as good as that one magical night at the piano had suggested? What if this was all just a fluke? A moment of luck that would never be repeated? But then she thought about her grandmother. About all those hours of practice. All that belief and support. About the little girl in the diner who'd wanted to hear something beautiful. About the 5 notebooks sitting in her apartment, full of words and melodies that no one had ever heard. She thought about the version of herself who'd gotten on a bus to Nashville 5 years ago, terrified but hopeful. That girl wouldn't have hesitated. That girl would have jumped at this chance. Maybe it was time to be that brave again. She looked at him and nodded. Yes, she'd do it. She'd record the demo. His smile was genuine, but he kept it professional. Told her they'd schedule studio time for the following week. Suggested she pick 3 or 4 songs, the ones that meant the most to her. Said he'd arrange for a session musician to help with the instrumental arrangements if she wanted, or she could keep it simple, just her and the piano. That night, she went home and spread all 5 notebooks across her bed. Reading through them was like excavating her own history, layers of who she'd been at different times in her life. Some songs made her laugh. Others made her want to cry. A few made her angry at how much time she'd wasted being afraid. By 3 in the morning, she'd narrowed it down to 4 songs. 4 pieces of her heart, written at different moments, when she'd needed to make sense of the world. 4 chances to prove that the dream wasn't dead, just sleeping. She didn't sleep much that night. But for the first time in 3 years, it wasn't because she was tired or defeated. It was because she was excited. Nervous, yes. Terrified, absolutely. But underneath all that fear was something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The recording session was scheduled for the following Tuesday. She had 6 days to prepare, to practice, to convince herself she wasn't making a huge mistake. 6 days to decide whether to stay invisible and safe, or to step into the light and risk everything one more time. She knew which choice she was going to make, the same choice that had brought her to Nashville in the first place. The choice to believe that her voice mattered, that her songs deserved to be heard, that she was more than just a waitress serving coffee in a diner. She was an artist. She'd just forgotten for a while. Now it was time to remember. The Tuesday morning of the recording session, she called in sick to work. The owner's voice on the phone was understanding, almost knowing. He told her to take care of whatever she needed to take care of, and there was something in his tone that suggested he knew exactly what she was really doing. She arrived at the studio an hour early, clutching the notebooks against her chest like a shield. The receptionist recognized her from her previous visit and buzzed her in with a warm smile. The building felt different today, less intimidating now that she knew what to expect. He met her in the lobby, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He looked almost as nervous as she felt, which somehow made her feel better. This mattered to him, too. This wasn't just another artist he was trying to develop. Somewhere along the way, they'd become invested in each other's success. The engineer was already set up in Studio B, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an easy manner that immediately put her at ease. She explained the process in simple terms, showed her how the microphone worked, assured her that they could do as many takes as she needed. There was no rush, no pressure. This was her time. They started with just her and the piano, the simplest setup possible. She sat on the bench, adjusted the microphone, and took a deep breath. Her hands found the keys, and she began to play the first song she'd chosen, the one about invisible people living invisible lives. The first take was terrible. She stumbled over the words, hit wrong notes, lost her timing. The fear was winning, making her hands clumsy and her voice tight. She apologized, started to stand up, but the engineer just smiled and told her to try again. First takes were always rough. That's why they were called first takes. The second attempt was better. The third was even better than that. By the 4th take, something clicked. She stopped thinking about the microphone, stopped worrying about making mistakes. She just played and sang, letting the song be what it needed to be. When she finished, there was silence in the control room. She looked up, worried, but the engineer and the talent scout were both staring at the monitors with expressions she couldn't quite read. Then the engineer pressed the intercom button and said, simply, that they had it. That take was the one. They recorded 3 more songs that morning. Each one felt easier than the last, like she was shedding layers of fear and doubt with every note. The final song was the one about her grandmother, the one she'd never played for anyone because it felt too personal, too painful. But sitting in that studio, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her music, she found the courage to share it. When the session ended, she felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. The engineer burned the recordings onto a CD for her to take home, but warned her that it would sound different once they mixed and mastered it. She didn't care. Just having her songs exist outside her head, captured and real and permanent, was enough. Over the next week, something unexpected happened. The talent scout asked if she'd be willing to perform at a small showcase the label was hosting. Nothing major, just a few industry people, some other artists, a chance to test the waters. She could do 2 songs, maybe 3. It would be good practice, he said. Low stakes. Her first instinct was to say no. A showcase meant people watching, judging, comparing. But then she remembered the little girl in the diner, the way pure joy had lit up her face during that simple song. She remembered her grandmother's voice, encouraging her to be brave. She remembered why she'd come to Nashville in the first place. She said yes. The showcase was held at a small venue called the Bluebird Cafe, a legendary spot where countless artists had gotten their start. Standing outside the building, she felt the weight of that history pressing down on her. So many dreams had been born here. So many had died here too. But when she walked inside, she saw familiar faces. The diner owner had closed early to come support her. A few of the regular customers she'd served for years were there too, including the father and daughter from that pivotal Thursday night. The little girl waved at her excitedly, and something tight in her chest loosened just a little. She waited backstage while other performers went on. They were all good, polished, and professional. She felt her confidence wavering. What was she doing here? These were real artists with real experience. She was just someone who'd played piano in a diner. Then it was her turn. She walked out onto the small stage, sat at the piano, and looked out at the audience. The lights weren't too bright. She could see faces, recognize people. The talent scout was there, sitting near the back. The diner owner was in the third row, giving her a thumbs up. She introduced herself with just her first name and the name of the song. No elaborate story, no excuses. Then, she began to play. The first song was the one about invisible people. As she sang, she realized she wasn't just performing for the industry people in the room. She was singing for every person who'd ever felt overlooked, every dream that had been dismissed, every moment of doubt she'd pushed through to get to this stage. Her voice filled the room, strong and clear and absolutely honest. The nerves were still there, but underneath them was something stronger. Certainty. This was who she was. This was what she was meant to do. When the song ended, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. But she barely heard it because she was already starting the second song, the one about her grandmother. This time, her voice cracked in places, emotion breaking through the performance. But that made it better, more real. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was trying to be truthful, the third song she hadn't planned to do. But as the applause faded from the second one, she felt something shift. She announced that she wanted to play one more, a new song she'd written just that week. It was about second chances, about finding the courage to try again after failing, about the people who see you when everyone else looks away. The room was absolutely silent when she finished. Not the awkward silence of confusion, but the heavy silence of people processing something that moved them. Then, the applause came. And it was different this time. People were standing, and some of them were crying, and the little girl from the diner was jumping up and down with excitement. That performance changed everything. Someone in the audience had recorded it on their phone and posted it online. By the next morning, the video had thousands of views. By the end of the week, hundreds of thousands. People weren't just watching it. They were sharing it, commenting, telling their own stories about being invisible and finding their voice. The record label wanted to sign her. Not because of industry connections or manufactured hype, but because real people were responding to her music in real ways. The demo she'd recorded became the foundation of her first album. The title came to her immediately. Just a Waitress. Because that's what she'd been, and she wasn't ashamed of it. Those 3 years serving coffee and clearing tables hadn't been wasted time. They'd been part of her story, part of what made her music authentic. She'd lived the songs she sang. She knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to doubt yourself, to keep going even when it seemed pointless. The album was released 6 months later. It went platinum within a year. But the success wasn't what mattered most to her. What mattered was the messages she received from listeners. People who told her that her songs made them feel seen. People who'd given up on their own dreams and were finding the courage to try again. People who'd been invisible their whole lives and finally felt like someone understood. She still visited the diner every week, though now as a customer rather than an employee. The piano in the corner had a small plaque on it now, Commemorating the night everything changed. Sometimes, when the place was quiet, the owner would let her play a song or two for the customers. And she always made time for the little girl who'd asked for a real song that Thursday evening. The girl who'd wanted something beautiful and, without knowing it, had given someone else the courage to share their gift with the world. The talent scout became more than a business contact. He became a friend. A reminder that sometimes the people who change your life are sitting right in front of you, invisible, until the moment they're not. Years later, when interviewers asked her about her success, she always told them the same thing. Talent matters. Yes. Hard work matters. Absolutely. But what matters most is being seen. Really seen. Not as a job title or a function or a background character in someone else's story, but as a whole person with value and gifts to share. She'd been invisible for so long, serving people who looked right through her. But she'd never actually been invisible. She'd just been waiting for the right moment. The right person. The right surge of courage to step into the light. And when that moment came, she'd been ready. Not because she was perfect or fearless, but because she'd held onto a tiny spark of hope even in her darkest moments. That spark had been enough to light the way forward. Sometimes all it takes is one person who truly sees you. One moment of courage. One song that comes from the deepest part of your soul. And suddenly, the whole world is listening.